I'm here at the Museum of Natural History here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I'm speaking with Jeff Gray, and we're at the age of the mastodon. And I look at this and I keep thinking of the Flintstones. You see the commercial where they've got the ribs on the thing, right? But maybe you can tell us a little bit about the mastodon and where it came from, how it came about here.
So this exhibit that we're in, as you said, is Age of the Mastodon, is something we've been working on for about a year and a half. We've long had an idea of bringing in a mastodon to the museum. And oddly enough, for us, it's been the silver lining of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the time of year when we would normally bring in our biggest shows. In the past, we've had Egyptian exhibits, body worlds, dinosaur exhibits. And with the uncertainty, we weren't sure about renting an exhibit. And so rather than doing that, we decided to purchase a mastodon and build an exhibit from our collections around it. 30 years ago, the museum was part of a large dig in Milford, Nova Scotia, where they found a mastodon at the quarry. We were brought out to that site, brought back a number of specimens, one of the richest finds of mastodons in North America. But it's been more than 30 years and we hadn't really done anything about that until now. And so that started the process of bringing this exhibit here.
Now, it's not a dinosaur, right? It's not. I mean, it wasn't playing with Keith Richards, right?
No,
Long time ago,
Keith
right?
is older. But the mastodons were here in Nova Scotia 80,000 years ago, before the Ice Age. And as you enter the exhibit, we actually take you past the timeline from today back 80,000 years to the age of the mastodon. And introduce you to what a mastodon is and what made up this exhibit and how that exhibit came to us here at the museum.
So how big were these things? I mean, is this a full-grown one or is this an adolescent? Or?
This is a full-grown adult. So this is how big they would have been.
And they were all over the Maritimes, right?
They were. Now, there's other than Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, there isn't fossil records that would prove that, but it's believed that they lived in this region.
And what would they eat?
So they were herbivores. They foraged.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, exactly. They foraged. Actually, just last year, there was a lot of interesting research that came by studying poop samples from fossilized poop. They broke it down so that they know that the mastodon that we have here in the museum, that was found in the same sinkhole, would have died in September. And during
the month it died?
They know the month. They know that it would have been in the hills and walked down through a field before reaching that sinkhole that it would eventually have fallen into. They know because of certain spores that were found that only are in the Atlantic region in that time of year. And Nova Scotia at that time would have looked and seemed very similar to what we have today.
Well, how big was that sinkhole?
So Nova Scotia is filled with sinkholes. In the news recently, there was a playground in Oxford, Nova Scotia that a sinkhole took it away.
Well, what's a sinkhole?
So a sinkhole is largely a deposit under the ground that is an unstable piece. So on the surface, it looks the same, but because water has eroded the basalt underneath it, it makes it unstable. They happen a lot around water areas, so most likely a mastodon would walk down, would stop for a drink of water, that ground gave away, it fell into this hole. They believe the one that we had broken bones from either the fall and or the struggle of trying to get out of that sinkhole before it ultimately would have died, John.
So this unfortunate beast just went down to get a drink of water, and the next thing you know, it's here.
Exactly.
Right?
But the upside of that from a museum perspective is the fact that they fell into that sinkhole is what preserved them for the amount of time that it did, that allowed us to find it. If an animal dies in any other way, they either become, scavengers come along and take away and disturb the body, weather, winter, everything changes and you don't find a whole body. When they fall into sinkholes, or in other parts of the world, they fall into tar ponds or other things that can actually, preserve the body. That's the difference that you get, and that's the reason that we were able to find this mastodon.
Now, when visitors come here, what can they expect to see, and what can they expect to experience in terms of the mastodon exhibit?
So we do lead visitors in through a long tunnel before they get into the exhibit. We really wanted them to be excited about seeing the actual mastodon.
You warn them about sinkholes, all right?
That's in the exhibit. But we wanted them to have, the experience of seeing this as a piece. But the exhibit is actually filled with specimens and artifacts that were found at that dig in 1991. And so we bring them in for the mastodon, but we really want them to understand the process that the museum was involved in, what museums do by collecting and preserving and ultimately rebuilding some of these fossils, and then also showcasing them and building an exhibit to share with people when they come to visit. We ultimately want them to understand that this mastodon lived in Nova Scotia, that Nova Scotia was fairly similar to what it is like today, and that museums go through a process of study and research and sharing so that other people can learn about them as well.
Well, an exhibit like this, it must just be great for kids.
It's been interesting. Many of our exhibits
they come and say, they're looking for a T-Rex or something like that?
All museum visitors come looking for a T-Rex,
exactly.
So that's not the biggest part. But children love it. But we've actually been finding what's been great is that adults in Nova Scotia love it as well, and people who remember the dig from 1991. Probably the most, profound component for this for us as museum professionals is that we've had a number of parents who've come to see the exhibit who were part of the dig in 1991 as children. Part of that dig, they sent boxes of mud to schools and classes all over Nova Scotia. Kids were able to sift away the sand, pull away the mud, and find things inside the mud. There's a turtle that's in this exhibit named Squishy. He was found.
What's the name of the turtle?
Squishy.
Squishy.
Yeah.
All right.
He was squished.
I can't wait to be squishy.
He's a great component of the exhibit as well. But seeing those parents come and remember being part of this experience and being able to share it with their children who get to see the mastodon and see the completed process and completed exhibit has been really a wonderful experience for us at the museum to be able to see that. In particular, there were a couple of people who came who were the same age as their children when they were doing that dig. And so 30 years to a mastodon may not be a lot of time, but in our time, there's a lot of transfer of knowledge that can happen, and that's always a wonderful thing at the museum. But with this exhibit in particular, it's been really great.
We're back, and apparently we're on a boat. So maybe, Jeff, you'd like to tell me a little bit about this?
Sure.
Before I get seasick?
We're on our Canyon Explorer here in the museum's Marine Gallery. We've had this exhibit since 2017. It is largely a replica of the research vessels that certainly people in Halifax know from the Bedford Institute of Oceanography. This exhibit is designed to showcase the work that BIO does offshore of Nova Scotia, specifically in the Gully region, which is a World Heritage Preservation Site. They go out and do a lot of research in that area, and this is basically a way of showing what that research is and sort of how they do it as well. BIO has been wonderful to work with. They have continued to help us to update what we showcase here in the museum by keeping that research current and fresh. We're also still in talks with them about doing more with this Gully ship. And it's certainly become something that's been popular with our younger visitors who have a chance to, go on a big giant ship inside the museum. But I think it's also been really interesting as a way of engaging our older visitors to learn more about this really important area of Nova Scotia that doesn't always get some of the credit and limelight that it deserves.
Arr. Where be ye, white whale? I be coming for ya.
Now, I think you're thinking of a different museum, but I'm glad you had a chance to drive this ship and see what that job was like. And really, this is the area where we want our visitors to learn about the different jobs that you could have on the ship. And if nothing else, it's a chance for kids to have a chance to play, pretend that they're driving, and really they can set course for their own adventure on the Canyon Explorer.
Well, it wouldn't be for me because I'm afraid of the water.
Well,
I don't swim, but I could see myself sailing the boat.
there you go. There's something for everyone here on this ship.
Who goes to the Gully?
In the case of the Bedford Institute of Oceanography, it really does vary. Now, there are jobs on the ship that are specific to running the vessel. The scientists can vary. It can be everything from biologists to marine biologists. They also take out scientists that are doing looking at birds and birds that are above the sea as well. It really depends on what's happening on any given year.
Is there any commercial activity going on there, oil or natural gas?
While those may be found in the Gully region, it is a protected area. The point of it is to protect it from the marine life that are out there. Interestingly, one of the things they're doing a lot of work right now on is understanding what impacts the sound have. It is still a commercial passageway for ships that go through, and currently a lot of the study is understanding the impacts that ships have and the sounds that they make on all of the animals that live out in the Gully area.
A lot of these animals, they would communicate through sound. Yes?
Exactly.
All right. Well, the antelope sight was a sickening sight. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now.
That's also another one of our museums.
What?
Sherbrooke.
Sherbrooke. All right. We should all sing it. Oh, the year was 1778. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. A letter of marque came from the king to the scuzziest vessel I'd ever seen. We've left the Explorer, and now we're on Sable Island, and I gotta say, it's one long swim.
Well, we made it.
Well,
We're here.
not everybody makes it, though.
That's true.
But perhaps you'd like to tell me a little bit about this, please?
Sure. Our Sable Island exhibit it's a permanent exhibit here at the museum. It's been here since 2014. And what we're looking at in this exhibit is the research that the museum is a part of that takes place on Sable Island. The museum has been involved with research on the island for a number of years, and this exhibit is really meant to showcase some of that research. And so we're sitting here in front of what's meant to be an example of a research hut that exists out on Sable Island. And for many people, they're not aware of the amount of species that are out on the island, that there's been species that are extinct that have been found on the island, that the island itself shifts and that the sand moves around, and depending on storms and the seasons, the island can look quite a bit different year after year. And so this exhibit tries to capture a lot of that. Obviously, the horses play a part in the exhibit as well. And really, actually, if you can see behind us and in other parts of the exhibit, you see a lot of the skulls of horses. We collect those. And many people wonder, well, why do you have so many? And why would you have such a huge amount of them in your collection? And part of that reason is that if you collect something over time, you see the changes in those skeletons that the horses would be experiencing while they're on Sable. And so you have them from a wide variety of time. You can see everything from environmental impact to what's happening to the horses themselves, and you get a better understanding of what's happening on the island.
So you're seeing through the horses how they adapt to their environment.
Exactly. One of the other things that the exhibit shows as well, we talk a lot about birds, we talk a lot about the marron grass that you find on the island as well. We also talk a lot about the garbage that is found that washes up on Sable Island. There is a lot of garbage, a lot of shocking amount of garbage that is found on the island. We find whole containers every season out on the island itself.
Where's it coming? Just ships passing that are just dumping it over?
No, most of it comes from land. We have containers, those large paint buckets. We have paint buckets that are filled with just the rings from balloons. Because when you let a balloon go and it drifts off into the air, oftentimes it ends up on Sable Island. And so they find the little piece of it. The rest of the balloons are often eaten by sea life.
But most of us now would be familiar with Sable Island because of the ponies.
I think for many people, that's their entry point to understanding that there is this breed of horses that lives off the coast of Nova Scotia on that island. But really, we hope that the exhibit opens their eyes to understand there's a lot more going on at Sable Island.
Maybe you can tell me some of the more exotic or odd things that people would not expect to be attached to
Sure.
Sable Island.
Well, as we've been talking about the horses, everybody is sort of aware that there are horses on Sable, but there's a lot of exotic things as well. We have some really interesting little pull-up panels that kids generally love. One talks about some of the exotic things on the island, like seahorse, that have been found there that are here as part of our collection. And then over my shoulder behind us are walrus tusks as well, which have been found on the island. So there's lots of really interesting things that can be found out on that island that have been brought back and are now part of the museum's collection.
No buried treasure, though, right?
Not that I'm aware of on the island, but certainly with everything that you find around it, you could consider all of it treasure.
So we've done the Mastodon, we've done the Explorer, and we've done Sable Island, and we're ending where people actually begin their visit. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about this display.
So this gallery is our Nadugalup gallery. It's a chance to take people to Nova Scotia's forest and share a little bit about what people can find when they're visiting, the forests of Nova Scotia. It's also where our live animal collection is largely stored. So for many visitors, their favorite part is be able to see the frogs or snakes. But people come and they want to see those things and learn about Nova Scotia's forests. Here in the summer, our bees are a huge draw. And then here behind us is a temporary exhibit that we've had for a few years now that's in partnership with the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center called This Is What I Wish You Knew. And it talks a lot about what Mi'kmaq community wishes people knew about them. And it really marries itself well to the forest exhibit that we have.
I do like the idea of the Mi'kmaq interpretation of what we wouldn't normally know. And I particularly like the part about the bees.
Well, the bees are wonderful. And I think that for a lot of people, especially in the winter when they don't expect them to be here and be alive and real, but in the summer when they have a chance to see them fly in and out of the building and seeing them going off and doing what they do and then fly back into the building and that they're making their own honey and that they use and consume what they make in the hive here in the museum is really a wonderful part for people to have when they're visiting.
Now, I have big arguments with my wife because she's a gardener. Right? And when the lawn comes up, you have dandelions. And she wants to cut them, and I don't.
That's right.
And the big argument is the dandelions are the bees' first food, correct?
You are correct. We are big supporters of dandelions. You're correct, the bees love dandelions. Also Gus, our gopher tortoise, he loves dandelions as well. And so they are a big part of the food chain for animals that are here in Nova Scotia.
Well, even though we're in an urban area, I know for myself personally, you still have these animals coming in from the forest. I've seen 7 deer go through our backyard, foxes, raccoons, all these birds. So it's even though you live in an urban environment, nature isn't that far away from you.
And you could argue that we're living in their backyard more than that they're coming to visit our backyards. And so I think that that's something that we like to talk about here too, is that the way that we interact with nature, the role that we play in nature, is something that's really important. And it's something that we're going to spend more time on as we move into the future as well, talking about climate change, the role that we play in it, how climate change impacts us. Something we didn't really talk about in the Mastodon exhibit as well is that it was climate change that in their inability to adapt to climate change that largely led to their extinction. And so, understanding that it's happened before, it happened in the past, and that we don't find ways to adapt to the climate change that's happening around us, it's not going to go well for us either.
Before we go, I want to know a little bit about Gus. He's probably the most popular exhibit here. How old is he? He's probably older than I am, and I'm as old as dust.
So Gus is our gopher tortoise here at the museum. He's been with the museum more than 80 years. He will be turning 100 in August.
100?
Yes, and so we have a number of events planned for the balance of this year. We're going to do an exhibit about Gus, and then in August, we always have his birthday party. This year, we're expanding it out to be the 12th, 13th, and 14th of August here at the museum. So that's always the #1 cupcake event in the city. But Gus has been a fixture of the museum before the museum was even here on Summer Street. He was purchased by a former director in the 1940s and brought back to the museum on Summer Street, where he wandered. There's stories of him wandering the floors and not really being thought about, and just sort of being a fixture of something that was at the museum. It wasn't really until a young volunteer came along, John Gillen, whose middle name was Augustus, that he would volunteer at the museum, and that he kind of took to looking after Gus, would spend time with Gus, and it became a thing where, oh, well, John's here, he became known as Gus. You flash forward in time, and that young boy goes off to university, becomes a biologist, comes back to work at the museum, and arguably becomes one of the leading experts on reptiles in Nova Scotia, and then retires, continues to volunteer at the museum, and still comes in once in a while now to do research and participate in the work that the museum does. And so, it's a wonderful connection of an entire person's life connected to the museum with this tortoise who's been here with the museum for 80 years and has been around for 100. I mean, it's particularly interesting in thinking about it now, in as much as those 100 years, he would have been born at the end of the Spanish flu pandemic and is now living through what are hopefully the ending days of our current pandemic.
Yes, please.
And these sort of 100 years of world wars and
depressions, world wars,
and computers and rock and roll and the Beatles and Keith Richards and everything else in between, that he has seen all of these things. But for us at the museum, and I've touched on this a couple of times, we see grandparents who bring their grandchildren or parents who bring their children and have come when they have been kids and seen Gus and gone on a walk with Gus or seen him eat dandelions or berries or lettuce. And people who have written books about Gus or drawn, created paintings or artwork or all these other fabrics of sort of Halifax life. There are people who are just sort of touched by this tortoise, and people can come every day and go on a walk and see Gus and interact with our staff and ask questions and learn more about him. And I think that it is because of that sort of longevity and that, while everything seems to change around us, this sort of constant that at the museum that people get to see. And he is pretty much the first thing that you see when you enter the museum and the last thing that you see when you leave the museum. And I think that sort of, wave hello and wave goodbye sticks with people, and they have sort of this ongoing relationship with Gus. And I think that's sort of the special part of visiting the museum.
So tell me, what do you get a 100-year-old tortoise for his birthday?
I think a lot of people would want to do lots of things for Gus, and certainly they try to, and they want to bring him things. But I think that honestly, the best thing that people can give Gus is sort of an understanding of the natural world. And if coming in and seeing Gus and learning about a gopher tortoise that's not native to Nova Scotia makes you learn about blanding turtles, which are in species at risk, or learning about sea turtles that live off the coast of Nova Scotia, or others, and then expanding that out to understanding those microplastics that we saw in the ocean, or the garbage that makes its way to Sable Island. If it's what inspires you to learn, then that's the best gift that you could give him, is the gift that you would give yourself. And I think that's sort of that gateway that allows people to come into the museum.